an 8-lane expressway at a cost of 10,000 crore, an airport expanded by acquiring 570 acres of land, and the impact of this on a lush belt of coconut and areca nut farms and paddy fields in Tamil Nadu. And when a student activist protests against this land acquisition, she is detained by the police. On what grounds, though? Hello and welcome. My name is Priya Mirza, and this podcast is The Longest Constitution. And we are talking about property. And this is also a fertile time to think about religious clauses in public law and restrictions on the right to movement. But first, the year is 1969, and it's the 18th of July. In the capital, New Delhi, at 6:30 in the evening, a senior drafting officer of the Law Ministry is summoned and instructed to draft an ordinance. He works all night and produces the draft. The next morning, it is approved by the Law Minister, and in a cabinet meeting that afternoon, the draft is passed by cabinet. No minister sees a copy because no copies were made. The ordinance was then signed by the acting president, V.V. Giri. That very evening, in the quiet hours, the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, in a radio broadcast, announces the nationalization of 14 banks. She explains, the banking system has to be necessarily inspired by social control, and proclaims that it will be a success. Hold on, a little explainer. What's an ordinance? Under Article 123, an ordinance, which in effect is equal to a law, can be promulgated by the President in the circumstance that Parliament is not in session. But Parliament on 19 July 1969 was scheduled to be in session 2 days later. So what was the hurry? The following day, a shareholder in one of the nationalized banks, Rustam Kawasji Cooper, plus Minu Masani and Balraj Modak, challenged the nationalization of the banks on the grounds that this infringed upon Article 14, 19 and 31. And the court issued interim orders. But was Parliament to be stopped? Since it was actually in session now, an act was passed, nationalizing those 14 banks. So today we're talking about the Bank Nationalization case, where banks that had deposits exceeding 50 crores were now under state control. But hello, what about the compensation of all these shareholders? Now here comes the awful part. The Act spoke of the amount of compensation, but this could be fixed by an agreement, if there was an agreement, which was to be fixed by a tribunal, and this compensation would be awarded after 10 years from the date when the agreement failed. What? R.C. Cooper filed another writ petition in Supreme Court challenging this, and an 11-judge bench considered this grave matter. Our second story today is with the Chennai-Salem 8-lane road, the story which we started off with today. This is a massive state project which involves state acquisition and also serves as a reminder that state acquisition is in fact the state's prerogative, but not at the cost of constitutionally guaranteed rights, or so we thought. This particular project, like so many others related to land conflicts, is marked by farmers unhappy about their farms being acquired, questions of compensation, protesters and dissenters. And when a student activist Valar Mathi protested against it, she was detained under the Goondas Act of the Tamil Nadu state. So let's get a little deeper into the Goondas Act and see why is it a problem. And Article 19, Part 1, Part E guarantees all citizens the right to reside and settle in any part of India. And just like the freedom of expression, the freedom of movement is also subject to reasonable restrictions. But the Goondas Act come at the cost of fundamental rights, and over the years, the 9 states it is presently in place in has been used for practically anybody who challenges the state. But wait, it gets worse. In proceedings under this law, magistrates can rely on hearsay as testimony, and confessions made by the accused before the police under interrogation actually serve as evidence. They're not bound by the standards mandated by the Indian Evidence Act 1872 to protect the rights of suspects. So basically, the Goondas Act, grants the state extraordinary discretionary power to detain people for more than a year. And the law, though is applicable for habitual offenders, is increasingly used for practically anybody. In Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh, arresting activists is now a routine affair. And all this without a single clear definition of the word Gunda. Our third story today is to do with the 13th century saint Basaveshwara. P.V. Narayana writes a book, Dharma Karana, a Kannada novel. And in this novel, which by definition is a work of fiction, depicts a world where Basaveshwara's nephew is born out of wedlock. And the book describes the public disgrace that followed his birth and compels the family to leave the town. Did I mention that Basaveshwara is a much adored saint by thousands of people? But these devotees took umbrage immediately to these fictional reconstructions of their beloved saint. Basaveshwara's followers wanted the book to be banned, and it was because Section 295A of the IPC allows wounded feelings on religious matters to be taken to court. A little bit about this section. This section was inserted in the IPC in 1927, which directly criminalized insults to religion and eliminated the requirement to prove that such insults actually promoted hatred between communities. So, Section 295A was not only about public order, and although it arose out of the situation of communal tension, the objective ultimately was to protect religious feelings. And interestingly, the colonial government thought that Indians would temper the tone of their religious writings, but that did not happen. Instead, what has happened is that books have been banned. Compounded with Section 95 of the CRPC, these laws allow governments to ban books on mere surmises, where the state doesn't actually have to present any evidence to show that religious feelings have actually been hurt. It is sufficient if it appears to the government that such beliefs might be injured. That hurts. So, what happened in R.C. Cooper versus Union of India 1917? Speaking for 10 of the 11 judges, Justice Shah struck down the act. He pointed out that the principles of compensation could in fact be scrutinized by the judiciary. The court noted that compensation actually must compensate and could not be this illusory sum. The lone dissenter of the judgment was A. N. Ray, a student of Presidency College, Calcutta, and later Oriel College, Oxford. In his dissenting note, he stated there was no infraction of Article 31, and he's a man about whom we will hear of again. What happened to the book about Basaveshwara? In Sri Baragur Ramachandrapa versus State of Karnataka 2007, the Supreme Court upheld the ban in the following words. No person has a right to impinge on the feelings of others on the premise that his freedom to speech remains unrestricted and unfettered. It cannot be ignored that India is a country with vast disparities in language, culture, and religion, and unwarranted and malicious criticism or interference in the faith of others cannot be accepted. This was a work of fiction. Did they forget that? So today's takeaways are Section 295A actually encourages Indians to feel wounded, upset, and insulted in religious matters and has provided a space for violence and litigation which has restricted the freedom of expression. The Goondas Act is vague and open to manipulation by the state. In Tamil Nadu this year, more than 235 people have been detained. And that's just between January and August. Lastly, R.C. Cooper was a successful British qualified chartered accountant, a noted economist, General Secretary of the Swatantra Party, without whom the government may not have provided any compensation at all in the Bank Nationalization case. More of this in the next episode. If you have questions or comments, please send them in via email, that's thelongestconstitution@gmail.com. You can also rate my podcast at Spotify and drop a review at Apple Podcasts, and can also reach out to me on Twitter. where I am at Fundamentally P or on Instagram, The Longest Constitution. Until next time, this is me, Priya Mirza, signing out.